I've just put my pocket telephone into aeroplane mode.
He's just put his pocket telephone into aeroplane mode. This is the Religious Studies Project. I'm Chris Cotter. He, with his pocket telephone, is...
I'm David Robertson, and I'm using British slang today because I'm going to America tomorrow, and I'm a little excited.
Yeah, you are. Yeah, you are. Why are you going there?
I'm doing field work. Remember field work, Chris?
Yes.
Yes. You're still untangling the ramifications of the last time you did it.
Yeah.
It's been a few years for me, and I'm doing some more, and it's very exciting.
Good.
So look out, LA.
Best of luck with that.
There's a tiny dynamo coming to stir stuff up.
Yeah, and you never know. You may end up in film.
I imagine so. I'm going to be in Hollywood.
This week's interview, speaking of Hollywood,
Hey?
I don't really know how that works. Well, Chris Silver is a man who's made for the big screen.
The silver screen, if you will.
There we go. That was excellent. And he's been speaking with Chris Black. So we've got Chris with a C and Chris with a K speaking about atheism, new religious movements, and cultural tension. Take it away, folks.
How many kind of atheisms are there? Are there different kinds of atheists? Different kinds of atheism? And what's the deal between new religious movements, non-religious belief, and cultural tension? Dr. Chris Silver joins me today, and welcome, Chris.
Thank you.
We're here to talk about your wonderful previous work and your current work in atheism and new religious movements. Why don't we just start with visiting briefly your previous work on the 6 different types of atheism?
Sure. Well, and I should also mention I got my start as one of the assistant editors of the Religious Studies Project.
Oh, that's right.
Back in
right.
2011, 2012. So it's strange to be on the other side of the
in the other
microphone.
chair.
Yeah, it's really weird. So hopefully I don't embarrass Chris, David, and Tommy. So here it goes, guys. I'll try. So a number of years ago, Tommy Coleman and I, and Tommy Coleman's now at Coventry University in the UK, and former both undergrad and graduate student of mine. I was in the process of working on a doctoral degree in learning and leadership from the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga, and was really, really interested in the sort of fallacy, particularly psychology, but even wider, sociology and some of the others had about atheism and agnosticism. So, for example, you see a lot of surveys, and you have all the, when people would identify, their beliefs or the religious associations, those spiritual associations, you always see atheism, agnosticism, sometimes you see none, N-O-N-E-S, right? Or unaffiliated. But with that community growing, and then, we've seen this in Pew Forum and RSS.
Fastest growing demographic.
Yes.
Right.
And so it just bothered me because, I thought there was more complexity there. And I was afraid that by us collapsing all that variability into a nominal variable, we were missing some richness that needed to be captured. But, through humble inquiry, I wasn't exactly sure what was going to be the most efficient way to do that. So I both say that I was blessed to do this study, and I also apologize profusely because, when you're the first person to try to do something like that, you just don't know what you're doing. So I don't ever claim that it has predictive power, although we have gotten a lot of anecdotal feedback from atheist agnostic studies that really resonate with. So anyway, we set out originally, Tommy and I did, and we conducted a series of interviews with people from all around the U.S. And we started discovering exactly we started finding very common themes for people from these different areas. And
themes of non-belief?
Non-belief, of how they identify to others, other things like their opinions of religious believers and how they interact with them, and how they interact with their families. And so then what we did was we sort of did a mix of both grounded theory and then sort of social constructionism with those people. No.
Nice.
And basically, we're trying to look at what is the shared reality. Initially, we set out to try to find what terms of identity did atheists agree on, but that failed miserably. I mean, because everyone had different, depending on who they were reading. I mean, somebody's reading Sam Harris, or somebody's reading Dawkins. I mean, everybody had they used the terms, but the definitions were radical.
Okay.
But it's sort of diamond in the rough here was when we sort of said, all right, we don't have agreement on the terms, we got into the definitions. And all of a sudden, just cleanly, these themes start emerging of agreement. And so, and all of a sudden, we started finding that there are attitudinal behavioral dimensions that were common among different kinds, including like how they saw the world and those kinds of things. So, Tommy and I, who's of course an editor on RSP, I believe still, he and I then started thematically pulling those together and sharpening them. And so for a second study, we then started using various psychometrics like the Big Five and the RIF, psychological well-being scale. We used the Rokish dogmatism scale, so for open closed-mindedness.
Oh, right.
And yeah, so when we sort of gave all these measures, we ended up finding some decent effects between the different groups and significant differences on different aspects. And so it was cool. And so we, as we promised our participants, we shared the results, just this little goofy web page so that they could see what their efforts went towards. And all of a sudden, one of the participants turned out was actually a journalist.
Oh.
And picked up our results. And the next thing you know, we're on the Christian Post, CNN, and I mean, I'm just like, I didn't know what to do. And we had some wild stuff happen. Like, first of all, some folks misrepresented our work, but I still appreciate the shout out. Like the Christian Post, for example, their leading head was, atheists might be sitting next to you in church. Oh. Because one of our groups that we found was this what we call virtual atheist agnostics, which are basically, they're atheists, but they still participate in
right, active non-believers.
Yeah. And there's been since then, there's been evidence in the Netherlands and a few other places that have found similar patterns.
Yeah. So what was the name of that? If someone wanted to find that article.
I think let's see, what did we call it? Atheism, non-belief. The 6 types of atheists and non-belief.
6 types of atheists.
Something like that. Yeah, I'm a terrible scholar. I don't remember my own work titles. but yeah, it was in that. And so it's been published. It's in, and most appropriately, it's actually in Psychology of Religion and Mental Health.
Well, there you go. In that journal. Okay.
Yeah, and so, that's a good international journal.
Right.
It's not tier 1, but they do some really great interdisciplinary work. And that's why, we went for them versus some of the others because we wanted to sort of have a wider audience. Even though they may not as many readers, they had great interdisciplinary work and perfect. So yeah.
So what was the feedback that you got from that?
So we've had interestingly enough, a lot of the secular community ended up really, and I mean secular in a broader sense. I mean, a lot of folks really said it felt like it resonated with them. I got invited to the Center for Inquiry in Buffalo, New York to present. I'm very humbled by that. I've been invited to various universities around to sort of share some of the results. And of course, I always lead with the disclaimer that, no, this is just an attempt. It's not going to be perfect. I'm sure there's amazing statisticians out there who probably did light years better cool stuff than I ever could. I mean, originally the goal that Tommy and I had was start a conversation. And the great thing is,
and that's what it's done.
And Tommy's gone on to do some really, really cool stuff in atheism. He's written some very sort of powerful pieces in terms of theory, which have been really good. So I'm incredibly proud of him for that. Also, I've got my graduate student now, which he just presented actually on concealment and disclosure. He just created a non-belief concealment scale and has had just really robust results, regional differences, and got a really interesting, I'll use the stats terms and put it in English. He's got a really interesting factor structure, which just means is that there's very clean subscales that are there that can be used.
So you can predict trends.
It's not like an institutional kind of just concealment versus like a personal kind of concealment. And so warmly received, sociologists, psychologists, we've got some really good feedback, but also people were like, yes, this needed to happen.
Great.
So I'm really proud of Cameron Mackey, I should mention.
Thank you.
I should mention his name because I'm very, very proud of him. This was his big day, and he did a good job.
Wonderful.
And so, we've been very, very lucky. And so,
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and I'm sure that work will take on even more projects and things in the future. So we'll look for
I hope
more
so, yeah.
information on that. That would be great.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's just shift a little bit now to your current work on the new religious movements and the cultural tension that's happening between religious belief and non-belief.
Yes, yeah. So for a long time, and I need to give a shout out to some other colleagues who I've been working with, for about since 2000, I've been working with colleagues from Bielefeld, Germany on research. Originally started in the idea of faith development, but we've actually shifted to faith styles. We've got a number of books as well as academic publications on the topic. And so my shout out would be to Dr. Heinz Strive, who's at Bielefeld University, Dr. Barbara Keller, who's at Bielefeld University. Ramona Bullock, who has been long time on the project as a project manager, and she's currently working on her doctorate at Bielefeld. And then, of course, I was academically born and raised by Dr. Ralph Hood, so I've been working with him since the early days. And so we've collaborated with Bielefeld now for, 18 years.
Wow.
That's half my life. And so we've gotten to co-author a book with them. And you got to realize, in my mind, I'm a nobody. So, I mean, seriously, I really am. I'm not saying that like some kind of humble, star or something. I really am a nobody. So, and we did a book on spirituality with multiple chapters, both quantitative and qualitative, with some mixed methods design. And we're working on some. We've got 2 more books in the works that we're working on right now, as well as a couple of manuscripts. But we're actually doing a longitudinal study of people's changes in their belief and faith. It's really interesting, and we've actually been able to find some of the original participants from 18 years ago.
Oh wow!
And then we've also got some over the years that we're tracking now. So we've with generous funding from the Templeton Foundation. John Templeton Foundation, we're now actually going to do this we're going to actually do some pretty heavy-duty longitudinal mixed methods work. And I'm sure you can appreciate how that's a massive logistical undertaking.
Yeah.
So that's all to say. Sorry, I had to put the foundation here, is that, so one of the things I've been looking at is I've been interested in social tension and how ideology sort of signals group membership. And this is sort of a spin-off of both Strive, Keller, and Hood's work, but it's not to say that it is their work. I want to make sure there's some clarity on that. Although I do have their support in terms of some of the data analysis and things I've done thus far. But the way the theory goes, and like I said, I have some preliminary findings already, is that if you think of, and I don't know how, assume the audience is probably mostly academics, theologians, social science researchers.
Students.
Yeah. I mean, if you think of, if you sort of think of a particular cultural context anywhere, it could be Utah, it could be Tennessee, it could be New Zealand, Africa. If you sort of accept for the fact that there's this sort of cultural norm of a particular tradition, which is like in the middle, and they're not really controversial or anything like that, but everybody sort of knows this is the norm, right? We've actually theorized that we call that group in our book, and we borrow from David Bromley's work on apostasy and sort of style of exit from back in the early 2000s. But we call that an integrated group, meaning like they're just culturally normative. There's virtually no social tension, and I'm setting all this up to so you don't sound crazy. So that group is sort of, it could be Methodist in Eastern Tennessee, it could be Mormons in Utah. It's whoever's the norm in that geographic context.
Mm-hmm.
Then the more you're sort of moving away from the center, right, the bell curve,
Mm-hmm.
and you start getting out into sort of like the, maybe say first standard deviation. But, bottom line is we're starting to move away from normative, right?
Mm-hmm.
You get in that sort of middle area. We call those accommodating. It means they still participate in society,
Mm-hmm.
but there may be certain behaviors, rituals, attitudes, beliefs, something that still makes them stand out just enough to create cultural tension. But they still attempt to participate. So, so if you think of like, you think of like being, say, Mormon and, out in southern Georgia or something,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
You go to church on Sunday like everybody else, but you have this additional theology that they go,
a little suspect.
Like in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which is where I'm from. An example of that would actually be like the Seventh-day Adventists. They're actually pretty common because they've got a university there, they've got multiple Seventh-day Adventist churches, but in their mind, they think that others, of course, are judging them for being a little different.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't.
Yeah.
But but that would be like an accommodating group. And then, and this is to get to your question, there's what we call opposition groups, which Bromley called subversive. These are groups that they have no real interest in participating in the larger culture. They, in some cases, make their own microculture so that they sustain it themselves, and they try not to participate as much as possible. An example I would use is in Chattanooga, we have this group called the 12 Tribes. They started there, and they're a new religious movement. I don't like the term cult because it now carries, while in the 60s it was a sociological term, it now carries this media stigma.
Right.
And quite frankly, there's just some incredibly wonderful people that I've gotten to know in that tradition. But yeah, their beliefs are very much different from others. And so they have, oppositional doesn't mean that there's something bad about them. It just means they cleanly stand out from the culture.
From the norm.
So my modification of where I'm going with this theory is that I believe that much like a bell curve, the more you get out in the tails, the more distance there is between numbers, right, or position. I actually argue that, the more a group differs from the norm, the more social tension there is, and therefore the more likely there's going to be intergroup prejudice.
Oh, interesting.
This is my argument. And so
within both groups?
Because you think about it. So if you think of the bell curve and the mean's right in the middle, one side would be like, religious and spiritual groups, right? That are, again, are normative. Everyone accepts they're part of the culture. You get a weirdo every now and then, but most everybody's, pretty cool. But then you start moving out, and you start getting into not only more fundamentalism and more sort of, you think about like institutional structural authoritarianism, rigidity, how, depending on which discipline you're in, sociology, psychology, this is different terms. But, the more you're moving out to the tails, the more protective you are of your group, and you're looking for any signal, be it verbal, behavioral, but you're trying to look for authenticity of who's in your group versus those that are outside, right? And so the more you're out this way, the more prejudice you're going to be of the norm. But here's the thing, from the norm's perspective, the more prejudice you're going to be of the outside.
Right.
Now, that's only one side of the bell curve.
Uh-huh.
So then think about the other side of the bell curve. This is where we get into spiritual. So folks that are spiritual, not religious, they might kind of half identify with something, but it's moving into a more individualized belief system as opposed to more structural.
Right.
So, but then as you're moving out, you start getting into, non-affiliated and religious nuns and then agnosticism and then atheism. Here's the beauty of it. It's like a bell curve. You collapse one side on the other. In theory, the tension should be the same. The behaviors will be the same. The attitudinal dimensions and rigidity should be the same.
Yeah.
And I've got.
That's fascinating.
As for my 6 types data, we already know that anti-theists are just as dogmatic as fundamentalists.
Right.
So the point is, we've already got some evidence of this, and I say we, I mean me. And this is, of course, where I deviate from my colleagues, so I hope this doesn't create confusion that they're doing this too. They've been very kind to give me some of their data. But what's interesting is I will give a shout out to Dr. Stride that he has this measure called the Religious Style Scale. It predicts these categories really well. And what's funny is he didn't make the scale with this intention.
Oh, really?
No, it just.
But it fits perfectly.
Yeah, so we did, I'll give the stats term and then I'll translate in English. So what I did is I did binomial regression, which allows us to predict group identity, right? By nominal. So essentially you're predicting nominal identity and you're looking to see, like, are there certain measures that contribute to the variance of that prediction, right? So does a measure predict the group in English? Sure enough, at least for the integrated and accommodating groups, it's good and it's strong, and we've got high betas, and so there's definitely some interesting potential there. So one of the things I'm going to speak about tomorrow is that I actually think that the oppositional should be the same way. I mean, we've already got some clean evidence. We've already got somewhat related evidence in some of these other studies that not just me, but some much more brilliant people like Potter, Lois Lee, Ryan Cragen, definitely on the sort of atheism side, and then even on the new religious movement side, you look at Gordon Milton, again Bromley. Shout out to Lauren Dawson, who was one of my professors when I was at Wilfrid Laurier University a long time ago. They've got some really interesting stuff that does seem to parallel what I'm suggesting, and so. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you've got a lot of really good theoretical lens, a good foundation there, some really good base that you can
knock on class.
Yeah,
we'll see what happens. But again, the problem with the problem I have is there's so many more brilliant people out in the world, but I still feel compelled to study it. So what I always try to do is work with. I try to never do this just me. I always try to collaborate with good people because that way they can help me red flag. And I'm also completing a doctorate in social psychology at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. And I'm working with a wonderful advisor by the name of Dr. Michael Olson, who does dual process theory research, which is cognitive.
Right.
And what I like about what I'm sort of working on here is that it taps into some of that. So like there's this sort of, you think about it in social terms, like when somebody's so radically different than you, you could have these sort of, feelings of disgust for somebody that's so radically different, not to mention anxiety, prejudice, anger, sadness. And so interestingly enough, my current dissertation, and as soon as I get it proposed and can start collecting data, which is almost done, the proposal anyway, is to actually study high status individuals like Christians, mainly integrated Christians who believe they're stigmatized.
Yeah.
In the sort of post-Trump era.
Right.
We've seen some of it, but it's been around for a while.
It has,
this theory, and I want to look and see if, do we see the same kinds of psychological patterns for someone who is high status and who's enjoyed privilege, to use the sort of liberal term.
And by high status, you mean like someone who's in the norm, who's already experiencing
They're in the norm. They've
sense of privilege.
They've enjoyed privilege, but then at the same time, for whatever reason, they feel like they've been discriminated against. But mainly, the big thing is that if they lose status, will they self-report feeling stigmatized?
Right.
And so we have an experiment where we actually tell them they're losing status versus a condition where we say they're not.
And kind of see what the reaction is.
Yep. So we'll see.
I know there are some groups who use persecution and loss of status as a kind of a confirmation of themselves. Is that the kind of thing?
It's interesting, but we're also going to look at white males too. So that way we're not just making it about religion. We're going to see if, do white males believe? And again, there's some at least preliminary correlational data that seems to indicate that some people feel this way. It's not to say everyone who's Christian feels that way, or every male, but if they're, and I should also mention, because I'm an Appalachian kid, so I'm from the country. I'm sure you can't tell by my accent at all.
No.
But the other side of it is that you think about those who've grown up in Appalachia in extreme poverty, and they're being told they have privilege. And so that creates a certain interesting level of cognitive dissonance.
Mm-hmm.
So, how would a person who's grown up in that environment, how would they respond to sort of diversity initiatives? And what is that there? And it's not a judgment I'm making. I'm just saying,
Right.
from a psychological
Observation.
perspective, what does that look like socially?
Yeah. And what does that mean out in society?
Absolutely. And so, when you have a West Virginia coal miner who's supporting Trump, who's like, we're going to bring coal back and we're going to do all, it's because I think in some ways, and I think I can say this with some certainty from my own anecdotal experience, is that they feel like they've not been a part of the national narrative for a long time.
They haven't been part of that norm. They haven't had that status.
That's right. And so, if we define privilege in terms of things like seeing themselves on TV,
Mhm.
absolutely. Privilege definition works. But if we talk about it in terms of opportunities for employment,
Right.
opportunities for resources,
Power to make change.
education access, in many respects, I see very similar patterns with my students, my undergrads at least, those who are first-generation college students from Appalachia, and then
Right.
some urban folks. Now, the urban folks probably come from more adverse kinds of challenges, but my point is, I gave a diversity talk one day at our university about dual process theory. Thank you, Dr. Olson. And what was fascinating was I made this similar argument. And would you believe, after I gave the talk, I had a number of folks who were sort of the minority advocates and, wait for it, conservatives, including some police, all come up and say they agree with you.
Wow.
Radical positions that were like, yeah, what you said makes complete
It really
sense.
resonates
And
with
what
them.
was crazy was, remember, this is post-Trump, they were talking amongst themselves about how they agree about the social economic inequity. And that is what brought them together. And they actually had a constructive conversation. I almost cried.
Yeah.
Because, you think about the...
Well, and that's what I was wondering about this polarization, that
Yes.
there is such a big divide. That is there a place for that type of coming together?
Yeah, and I think I'm totally pulling a Chris Silver and going down a rabbit hole. I'm sorry. But I think we're at an interesting moment in human history. Because for the first time, not only do we have access to any information we ever wanted, we're highly diverse. We interact with far more people than any of our ancestors ever did. So there's interesting both social, cognitive, evolutionary. There's
on every level.
Yeah. So we're at a weird nexus in human history, and I think for some of us, we've moved too fast. And I think some of the things that you're seeing is that they felt like they had a voice, but also think they had time to adjust to all the change.
Right.
And in many respects, some changes need to happen still to come into change. But then at the same time, I think a lot of us, the uncertainty and the fear that we have about change is also driving some of our closed-minded attitudes. And I'd say this from not just the right, but also as a guy on the left.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting time. It's a really interesting time. So I had that. So cultural tension for me, so let's circle back around. Cultural tension for me is a really interesting aspect. And, that to me, how we signal to others our group membership, it's no longer about discourse. It's about tribalism.
Ah. Wow.
Sorry, I just...
Well, look forward to
all over
it. Just, fascinating stuff here.
Yeah.
I really look forward to reading more of your work. And best of luck with your dissertation.
Thank you.
And your continued success with 6 types of atheism.
Yeah, I don't know what we're going to do next. I'd like to at some point talk to more intelligent people. Might buy Ron Craig a beer.
There you go.
Chris Cotter a beer and get some notes.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us.
No, thank you again. And again, shout out to all my old buddies at the Religious Studies Project. Thank you, guys.
Wonderful to hear from Chris Silver, again, a longtime pal of the project from way back, one of our the first people who came to help Chris and I. And also good to hear from Chris Black. Both colour surnames, I just realised. That's
Wow.
Yep.
The colour Chris's.
And that's what we'll call them from now on. I'll let them know that they have to record exclusively together from now on. Next week, there's another Chris. Yes! It's this guy.
It's me.
Cotter isn't a colour, unfortunately.
We could make it into one. I spoke with Vila Huskafel of the University of Helsinki about mindfulness, which is a topic that I don't think has come up at all. I mean, it might have come up in passing in the odd interview. So we take on the topic, and he gives a nice sort of critical RS approach to the discourse surrounding the term and this history of it. And yeah, it's good.
I will be interested to hear that one. Nice to have you interviewing again. That's it. Do we have any news for the listeners this week? I mean, I don't know. Have we mentioned the fact that we've now had 700,000 downloads? Probably over that now. We are close to 750,000 downloads. That's not page hits. That's downloads of podcasts. So thanks to all of you. It's very exciting to see. Well, it's rewarding to see it being used, which was what we always wanted it to be.
I'll just not tell David that it's just been me sitting. I get up every morning and download 10 podcasts every day.
I wondered why there was these stacks of hard drives in your flat, and now I know.
So come back for the chat with Vila next week, and thanks for listening.
Thanks. Hey, thanks for listening.
Thanks. The RSP is sponsored by the British Association for the Study of Religions, the North American Association for the Study of Religion, and the International Association for the History of Religions. The Religious Studies Project is produced by the Religious Studies Project Association, SCIO, a Scottish charitable incorporated organisation, charity number SC047750.
Brought to you by founders and editors-in-chief Chris Cotter and David Robertson, and managing editor Thomas J. Coleman III. Our features are edited by Marek Sullivan and Rebecca Barrett-Fox, and our Opportunities Digest by Ella Bock. Podcast transcription by Helen Bradstock, with audio editing by Gregory Schneider and Samuel Ward. Social media managed by Ray Radford, sales and marketing by Sammy Bishop, and video editing by Jonathan Tuckett.
Don't forget you can support the project by using our amazon.com.co.uk and .ca links, or donating at patreon.com/projectrs, and you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, YouTube, iTunes and other portals.